Sometimes the person everyone pities is the only one who truly holds all the power. Those words echoed in Ethan Brooks' mind as he stood beneath the crystal chandeliers of the historic ballroom overlooking Boston Harbor, waiting for a wedding ceremony he had never wanted. At 31, Ethan had built a reputation as the disciplined alpha CEO of Brooks Capital, a respected investment firm founded by generations of his family. Every guest in attendance believed they understood exactly why this marriage was happening. They whispered that Brooks Capital needed to preserve an old family agreement, that Ethan had no choice but to marry Noah Bennett, an Omega whose name had become little more than an unfortunate rumor among Boston's elite circles. Some called Noah quiet. Others called him insignificant. The crueler voices labeled him unwanted, insisting that no influential family had ever truly accepted him. Ethan had heard every version of those stories and never bothered questioning them because his grandfather's final request had left no room for debate. Honor the promise. Protect the family. Complete the marriage. As the orchestra filled the ballroom with elegant music, Ethan adjusted the sleeve of his perfectly tailored black suit and glanced toward the entrance. Conversations softened as Noah appeared. He wore a simple yet impeccably tailored navy suit without unnecessary luxury, walking with calm, measured confidence that seemed strangely untouched by the judgment surrounding him. While several guests exchanged amused smiles and barely concealed whispers, Noah acknowledged none of them. His expression remained composed, neither proud nor ashamed, as though the opinions filling the room carried no weight at all. Ethan expected awkwardness when they finally stood beside one another before the officiant, yet Noah simply offered a respectful nod that carried neither resentment nor expectation. The ceremony began, and the words flowed with practiced elegance, but Ethan's attention drifted toward the audience. Something unusual unfolded in the corners of the ballroom. An elderly banker from New York, whose interviews regularly appeared on national television, quietly lowered his head as Noah passed nearby. Moments later, the founder of a multinational logistics company subtly raised his champagne glass toward Noah before returning to casual conversation as if nothing remarkable had happened. Across the room, a retired federal economic advisor smiled warmly at Noah with unmistakable familiarity before leaving without speaking to anyone else. Ethan frowned. None of these people acknowledged him, the groom and CEO whose company had invited them. Yet each seemed quietly aware of Noah. It happened too naturally to be coincidence. Before Ethan could process the pattern, one of his board members leaned close and whispered with a smirk that marrying an overlooked Omega was at least cheaper than hosting another engagement if the family changed its mind later. Several nearby guests laughed politely. Noah heard every word. Instead of reacting, he thanked a server who accidentally brushed against his sleeve and stepped aside so the young employee would not feel embarrassed. That single gesture unsettled Ethan far more than any insult. Throughout years of negotiations, he had learned to recognize genuine confidence, and Noah possessed a quiet certainty unlike anything Ethan had expected. The reception continued beneath glittering lights while cameras captured smiling photographs meant to convince the public that Brooks Capital celebrated another prestigious union. Ethan fulfilled every expected tradition, greeting investors, thanking relatives, and answering predictable questions about the company's future. Yet each time he looked across the ballroom, someone unexpectedly important seemed to acknowledge Noah with understated respect before disappearing into the crowd. None requested introductions. None sought publicity. None explained themselves. They simply recognized him. Late in the evening, as the final guests prepared to leave, Ethan watched Noah stand alone beside the terrace overlooking the harbor, the city skyline reflecting across the dark water. There was no trace of bitterness in his posture, only quiet reflection. Ethan suddenly realized the rumors surrounding his new husband had described almost everything except the one thing that truly mattered. No one had ever explained why people with extraordinary influence looked at Noah as though they already knew a truth the rest of the world had somehow failed to notice. The first week of marriage settled into a routine that felt more like two strangers sharing the same address than newlyweds beginning a life together. Ethan Brooks left the house before sunrise each morning, driving through downtown Boston toward the headquarters of Brooks Capital while reviewing financial reports and market updates during the commute. Noah Bennett never asked where he was going or when he would return. Instead, he quietly prepared breakfast every morning, leaving a fresh cup of coffee on the dining table even though Ethan rarely had time to finish it. At first, Ethan assumed the gesture was simply good manners, but after several days he realized the coffee was always prepared exactly the way he preferred without Noah ever asking a single question. The observation lingered in his thoughts longer than he expected. One afternoon, Ethan returned home earlier than usual after a board meeting ended ahead of schedule. He found Noah in the estate garden carefully trimming roses while speaking with the elderly groundskeeper about replacing several damaged plants before the arrival of spring. There was no trace of luxury or entitlement in the conversation. Noah listened attentively, thanked the gardener for decades of service, and insisted that the oldest trees should never be removed because they carried family memories that could not be replaced. Ethan remained standing by the terrace for several moments, surprised by how naturally Noah seemed to belong in a place that had never truly welcomed him. During the following days, more unusual moments quietly accumulated. At a neighborhood bookstore, the owner immediately recognized Noah and greeted him with sincere warmth before personally locating a rare edition of an American history book that had supposedly been unavailable for months. At a charity luncheon organized by a local hospital, one of the hospital trustees interrupted his own conversation with several prominent donors simply to shake Noah's hand and thank him for attending. Noah accepted the greeting politely, but never explained how they knew each other. Ethan noticed these encounters becoming impossible to ignore. None of the people sought photographs, introductions, or public attention. They simply treated Noah with effortless respect before continuing with their day. The pattern became even stranger later that week when Ethan attended a private business reception hosted by one of Boston's largest commercial banks. While speaking with senior executives about an upcoming expansion project, he noticed the bank's chairman quietly walking across the ballroom. Ethan expected the chairman to approach him because Brooks Capital was one of the institution's largest corporate clients. Instead, the chairman passed directly by Ethan, greeted Noah with a warm smile, exchanged only a few quiet words, and respectfully wished him a pleasant evening before returning to his own guests. Ethan stared in disbelief. The chairman had barely acknowledged him, yet he behaved as though Noah were someone whose respect genuinely mattered. On the drive home, Ethan finally broke the silence and asked whether Noah had known the chairman for many years. Noah simply smiled toward the passing city lights and answered that life often allowed people to meet in unexpected places. The reply was calm, honest in tone, yet it revealed absolutely nothing. Ethan wanted to press further, but something about Noah's quiet confidence made additional questions feel strangely unnecessary. As the days continued, Ethan found himself paying less attention to the rumors he had once accepted without question and more attention to the undeniable reality unfolding before him. Every unexpected greeting, every subtle gesture of respect, and every unexplained connection suggested that the man everyone had dismissed carried a history far more extraordinary than anyone in Boston seemed willing to discuss. For the first time since the wedding, Ethan stopped wondering why he had been forced into the marriage and began wondering who Noah Bennett truly was. The quiet rhythm that had begun to settle over Ethan Brooks' life disappeared on a rainy Tuesday morning, when the emergency call from Brooks Capital arrived before 7 o'clock. By the time he reached headquarters in downtown Boston, every executive conference room was already occupied. Financial analysts moved rapidly between offices carrying updated reports, and large monitors displayed falling stock prices beside alarming market headlines. The atmosphere felt heavier than anything Ethan had experienced since becoming chief executive officer. His chief financial officer informed him that Richard Langley, the influential founder of Langley Strategic Holdings, had quietly acquired significant voting rights through several affiliated investment firms. Individually, the purchases appeared ordinary, but together they represented a coordinated attempt to pressure Brooks Capital into accepting a restructuring agreement that would gradually transfer operational control away from Ethan's family. Richard was known throughout the financial industry as a patient negotiator who preferred contracts over confrontation, making every move appear completely legal while leaving very few alternatives for the companies he targeted. Throughout the day, Ethan met with attorneys, board members, investment bankers, and senior advisors, searching for a practical solution. Every proposal carried painful consequences. Selling company assets would weaken future growth. Accepting emergency financing would place Brooks Capital under restrictive conditions. Rejecting Richard's proposal entirely risked damaging investor confidence even further. As the hours passed, the options became increasingly limited. Late that afternoon, Ethan returned home exhausted, carrying folders filled with financial projections that offered little reason for optimism. Noah was waiting in the library beside the fireplace, reading quietly as rain tapped gently against the tall windows overlooking the estate gardens. Ethan apologized for arriving late and admitted that Brooks Capital might be facing the greatest challenge in its modern history. Noah listened without interrupting, allowing Ethan to explain every detail of Richard's strategy, the pressure from shareholders, and the board meeting scheduled for the following morning. When Ethan finally finished speaking, expecting sympathy or encouragement, Noah simply closed his book and asked one calm question. "Has Richard given you a final deadline?" Ethan nodded and explained that the documents were expected to be signed within 24 hours. Noah remained silent for several moments before looking toward the rain outside. "Then do not sign tomorrow," he said softly. "Wait one more day." Ethan stared at him in disbelief. Every experienced advisor had warned that delaying the agreement could make the situation even more uncertain. "One day could cost the company millions of dollars," Ethan replied. Noah met his eyes without the slightest trace of hesitation. "Or it could save everything." There was no dramatic speech, no explanation, and no attempt to persuade him further. Noah simply returned to reading as though the conversation had reached its natural conclusion. That evening, Ethan reviewed every report again, searching for some logical reason behind Noah's confidence. None existed. The numbers still favored Richard. The legal opinions remained unchanged. The market offered no encouraging signals. Yet for reasons he could not explain, Noah's quiet certainty lingered in his thoughts more powerfully than the endless forecasts prepared by experienced consultants. The following morning, the board assembled to approve the restructuring agreement. Directors argued that immediate action would reassure investors and prevent additional uncertainty. Ethan listened carefully, glanced once at the unsigned documents resting before him, and unexpectedly remembered Noah's calm voice repeating only 4 simple words. "Wait one more day?" After a long silence, Ethan closed the folder and informed the board that Brooks Capital would postpone the signing until the following afternoon. The room erupted with surprise, confusion, and concern, but Ethan remained firm. For the first time since meeting Noah Bennett, he had chosen to trust not the loudest opinion in the room, but the quietest one. The decision to delay the signing sent a wave of uncertainty through Brooks Capital, and by the next morning, every major financial publication was speculating about the company's future. Ethan Brooks spent the early hours responding to concerned board members, reassuring investors, and answering calls from longtime business partners who wanted to know whether the company had discovered a new source of financing or simply chosen to gamble with its future. Ethan had no convincing explanation because, in truth, he had acted on nothing more than Noah Bennett's quiet confidence. Even so, something deep inside him refused to believe that Noah would make such a request without reason. Shortly after 10 o'clock, Ethan's executive assistant entered his office carrying a sealed cream-colored envelope with no corporate logo and no return address. The envelope had been delivered by hand with instructions that it was to be opened only by Ethan Brooks. Inside rested a single invitation printed on thick white paper. It requested the presence of Ethan Brooks and Noah Bennett at a private financial conference taking place that evening inside an exclusive executive meeting hall overlooking Manhattan's financial district. No additional details were provided except the location, the time, and a brief sentence stating that attendance was strongly recommended before any irreversible business decisions were made. Ethan examined the invitation several times, searching for clues about the sender, but found none. He contacted several trusted colleagues in New York, yet no one admitted knowing anything about the meeting. By late afternoon, curiosity and desperation outweighed caution. Ethan informed the board that he would be traveling to New York for an urgent matter and postponed all remaining discussions until the following morning. Noah accepted the invitation without surprise, quietly packing only a small travel bag as though he had expected the trip all along. During the short flight from Boston to New York, Ethan watched the clouds drift beneath the aircraft while trying repeatedly to understand how Noah could remain so calm when Brooks Capital stood on the edge of losing everything. Noah spent most of the journey reading a hardcover book and occasionally looking out the window, his expression unchanged despite the enormous consequences waiting ahead. After landing, a black luxury sedan was already waiting outside the terminal with both of their names displayed discreetly on a digital welcome screen. Neither Ethan nor Noah had arranged transportation. The driver greeted Noah with quiet respect before opening the rear door without asking for confirmation. Ethan noticed the exchange immediately, but said nothing. As they entered Lower Manhattan, the evening skyline shimmered across the glass towers of the financial district, while the streets below remained busy with professionals leaving their offices. The sedan finally stopped before an elegant building whose understated exterior revealed little about the importance of those gathering inside. Security personnel welcomed them by name and escorted them through polished marble corridors toward a private conference floor that was inaccessible to the public. Along the way, Ethan began recognizing familiar faces from international banking, private equity, and global investment firms. Several of them glanced toward Noah with expressions that carried unmistakable warmth and quiet admiration before respectfully stepping aside to allow him to pass first. None of them appeared surprised by his arrival. Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken as each unexpected greeting deepened the mystery that had followed his husband since their wedding day. Standing just outside the closed conference room doors, Ethan turned toward Noah and finally asked the question that had been growing inside him for weeks. Who are all these people, and why do they all seem to know you? Noah offered the same calm smile that Ethan had come to recognize, then looked toward the polished wooden doors waiting to open. You are about to find out, he replied gently. At that exact moment, the doors slowly began to swing inward, revealing a room filled with some of the most influential financial leaders in the country, all waiting in complete silence for their arrival. As the conference room doors opened completely, Ethan Brooks stepped inside, expecting another tense negotiation with attorneys and investment executives. Instead, he found a long walnut table surrounded by some of the most respected leaders in American finance. Chief executive officers from major investment firms, presidents of national banks, founders of private equity groups, and several retired economic advisors were already seated in quiet conversation. The room fell completely silent the moment Noah Bennett entered behind him. Before Ethan could understand what was happening, every person around the table rose to their feet at nearly the same moment. There was no applause, no dramatic announcement, and no display meant to impress anyone. It was a simple gesture of genuine respect. One after another, the executives greeted Noah by name, thanking him for making the trip to New York and expressing appreciation for his willingness to attend despite his preference for privacy. Ethan stood motionless. Many of these individuals had spent years building reputations that shaped entire industries. Yet each of them addressed Noah with the same quiet courtesy normally reserved for someone whose judgment carried extraordinary weight. An elderly banker whom Ethan had admired throughout his career smiled warmly and invited Noah to sit at the head of the table. Noah politely declined and chose a regular seat beside Ethan instead. The small decision seemed to reinforce rather than diminish the respect in the room. After everyone had taken their seats, the chairman of the meeting welcomed the group and turned toward Ethan with a calm expression. He explained that Brooks Capital had become the target of an unnecessary financial campaign because several market participants believed the company no longer possessed influential allies. He then looked toward Noah and smiled. Fortunately, that assumption was never accurate. Another executive activated a large presentation screen displaying the ownership structures of numerous investment partnerships, charitable foundations, and long-term holding companies that had quietly supported American businesses for decades. Ethan recognized many of the organizations, but what shocked him was the name listed beside their original formation documents. Noah Bennett. The chairman continued by explaining that more than 10 years earlier, Noah had established a private investment network dedicated to preserving family-owned businesses, encouraging responsible corporate leadership, and protecting companies from short-term speculation. Rather than seeking publicity, Noah had intentionally remained outside the spotlight while trusted professionals managed the day-to-day operations. His influence had grown steadily through patient decisions, careful partnerships, and an unwavering commitment to long-term stability. The network now represented interests across banking, technology, transportation, manufacturing, and real estate, making it one of the most respected financial alliances in the country despite operating with remarkable discretion. Ethan felt as though every assumption he had ever accepted about Noah was quietly dissolving. The stories describing him as forgotten, powerless, or unwanted suddenly appeared almost impossible to believe. One of the investment founders smiled toward Ethan and explained that Noah had personally recommended financial assistance for dozens of struggling companies over the years, often without revealing his involvement. Another executive recalled how Noah had insisted that preserving jobs and protecting communities should always matter as much as quarterly profits. No one spoke about luxury or personal wealth. Instead, every conversation centered on integrity, responsibility, and trust. Finally, the chairman placed a folder before Ethan containing a coordinated financial proposal. Several institutions represented in the room had agreed to provide Brooks Capital with strategic support, restore market confidence, and neutralize Richard Langley's attempted takeover through entirely lawful business partnerships. The offer required no surrender of family ownership and imposed no unreasonable conditions. Ethan slowly looked toward Noah, searching for an explanation. Noah simply returned the same calm expression that had remained unchanged since the day they met. In that quiet moment, Ethan realized that the greatest secret had never been Noah's wealth. It was the character that had earned the lasting respect of people powerful enough to change the future of an entire company with nothing more than their trust. By the following morning, the effects of the New York meeting began spreading through the financial world with remarkable speed. Before the opening bell on Wall Street, several respected investment institutions announced long-term strategic partnerships with Brooks Capital. Analysts who had predicted the company's decline suddenly revised their forecasts, pointing to renewed confidence from some of the nation's most trusted financial organizations. Investors responded immediately, and the uncertainty that had surrounded Brooks Capital for days gradually gave way to cautious optimism. Ethan Brooks arrived at headquarters before sunrise, only to discover that his executive team had already gathered around the large market screens in the boardroom. The numbers updating across the displays reflected a dramatic change in sentiment. The company's stock had stabilized, major shareholders had withdrawn concerns about emergency restructuring, and several institutional investors had increased their positions instead of reducing them. The atmosphere inside the office felt completely different from only 24 hours earlier. Conversations that had once centered on survival now focused on future opportunities. Mid-morning, Richard Langley entered the building for what everyone expected would be the final negotiation. He carried the same confidence that had defined every previous meeting, but it slowly faded as updated financial reports were placed before him. One by one, the advisors accompanying him reviewed the latest market developments and quietly exchanged concerned glances. The institutions that had unexpectedly aligned with Brooks Capital represented partnerships too significant to challenge through ordinary corporate pressure. Richard remained professional, carefully reading every page before setting the documents aside. After several moments of thoughtful silence, he acknowledged that continuing the proposed restructuring would no longer benefit either organization. Rather than forcing an unnecessary conflict, he formally withdrew his offer and expressed hope that both companies could compete fairly in the future. Ethan accepted the decision with courtesy, recognizing that a respectful conclusion would serve everyone better than prolonged hostility. Once Richard and his advisors departed, relief swept across the boardroom. Directors who had spent days fearing the loss of the family business finally allowed themselves to smile. Several senior executives congratulated Ethan on his judgment, believing he had somehow orchestrated a brilliant financial strategy behind the scenes. Ethan accepted their appreciation politely, but he knew the truth. The decision that had changed everything had begun with 4 quiet words spoken by Noah beside the library fireplace. Later that evening, Ethan returned home carrying none of the anxiety that had followed him throughout the previous week. He found Noah preparing tea on the back terrace as the setting sun painted warm shades of gold across the gardens. The peaceful scene felt almost unreal after everything that had happened. Ethan thanked Noah sincerely for saving Brooks Capital. Noah looked at him with gentle surprise and shook his head. He explained that companies were never truly saved by money alone. They survived because people chose integrity over fear, patience over panic, and trust over pride. Wealth could solve temporary problems, but character determined whether success would endure. Ethan reflected on those words for a long moment. Since their wedding day, he had measured Noah according to rumors created by people who had never truly known him. He had mistaken quietness for weakness and humility for insignificance. Now he understood that Noah had never tried to impress anyone because he had never needed external recognition to define his worth. The respect surrounding Noah had been earned through years of thoughtful decisions, kindness shown without expectation of reward, and a reputation built where public attention rarely reached. As evenings settled across the estate, Ethan realized that the greatest transformation had not occurred within Brooks' capital or the financial markets. It had taken place within his own heart. For the first time, he no longer viewed Noah Bennett as the stranger he had been obligated to marry. He saw him as a man of extraordinary wisdom whose greatest strength had always been invisible to those who judged only appearances, and Ethan quietly wondered how many more remarkable truths remained waiting to be discovered. Several weeks passed after Brooks' capital regained its stability, and life gradually returned to a peaceful routine that neither Ethan Brooks nor Noah Bennett had expected to enjoy so soon. The constant stream of emergency meetings disappeared, investors regained confidence, and employees once again focused on expanding the business instead of defending it. Although the company had recovered, Ethan found himself thinking less about financial reports and more about the unanswered questions surrounding his family's past. His grandfather had insisted on the marriage until his final days, yet he had never fully explained why the promise mattered so deeply. One quiet Saturday afternoon, while organizing documents stored inside the old library at the Brooks family estate, Ethan discovered a small cedar chest tucked behind several shelves that had not been moved in years. The brass lock had already been opened, and inside rested neatly preserved letters, faded photographs, handwritten journals, and two carefully folded envelopes bearing familiar family names. One envelope carried the signature of Ethan's grandfather. The other belonged to Noah's grandfather. Curious, Ethan carried the box into the sunlit reading room, where Noah was quietly arranging several donated books that would soon be delivered to a local community library. Together, they carefully unfolded the aging letters, reading every handwritten page with growing attention. The first letter revealed that more than 40 years earlier, Ethan's grandfather and Noah's grandfather had built their first businesses side by side, supporting one another through difficult economic seasons that tested both families. Success had eventually taken them in different directions, but their friendship never weakened. In one passage, Ethan's grandfather wrote that true wealth could never be measured by property, market value, or public reputation. Instead, he believed it was measured by the people who remained trustworthy. After success arrived, Noah's grandfather had written a remarkably similar thought in his own letter, explaining that character should always be protected more carefully than fortune because money could be earned again while integrity, once lost, was far more difficult to restore. As Ethan continued reading, he finally reached the sentence that answered the question he had carried for so long. The marriage agreement had never been created to merge businesses or increase family influence. It had been written as a promise that if both grandchildren grew into honorable adults, they should be given the opportunity to build a future together because each family trusted the values of the other more than any financial contract. There had never been an expectation that love could be arranged. Instead, the marriage was intended to create the possibility for two good people to discover one another beyond the distractions of status and reputation. Ethan slowly lowered the letter, overwhelmed by the realization that he had misunderstood the purpose of the promise from the very beginning. Noah quietly smiled, explaining that his grandfather had shown him copies of the letters many years earlier, but had never pressured him to expect anything from the marriage beyond honesty and respect. Noah admitted that he had accepted the arrangement not because he believed destiny guaranteed happiness, but because he wanted to honor a friendship that had shaped two families across generations. Sitting together beneath the warm afternoon sunlight streaming through the tall library windows, Ethan realized that every decision his grandfather had made suddenly carried a deeper meaning. The marriage had never been about obligation alone. It had been an invitation to discover the kind of person hidden beneath appearances, assumptions, and social expectations. Looking across the table at Noah, Ethan understood that the greatest inheritance either grandfather had left behind was not a company, an estate, or financial success. It was the wisdom to recognize character before reputation and to choose trust before judgment, a lesson that had quietly transformed both of their lives in ways neither of them could have imagined when they first stood together at the altar. The letters remained on the library table long after the afternoon sunlight faded, and neither Ethan Brooks nor Noah Bennett felt the need to speak immediately. The silence between them no longer felt uncomfortable. Instead, it carried the quiet understanding that comes only after two people finally begin seeing one another without the weight of assumptions. During the following weeks, their daily routines changed in subtle but meaningful ways. They shared breakfast before Ethan left for Brooks Capital, discussed community projects over dinner, and occasionally walked through the estate gardens in the evening without feeling obligated to fill every moment with conversation. What had once been a marriage built upon duty slowly transformed into a genuine partnership founded on mutual respect. One evening, as autumn colors settled across the trees surrounding the estate, Noah invited Ethan to join him in the same library where they had discovered their grandfather's letters. A single folder rested neatly on the wooden table between them. Noah slid it forward with a calm expression and explained that it contained the original marriage agreement signed by both families many years earlier, along with newly prepared legal documents that would immediately dissolve every remaining obligation connected to their union. Ethan looked at the papers without touching them. Noah gently explained that the promise made by their grandfathers had already fulfilled its purpose. They had honored the agreement, protected both families, and discovered the truth behind the marriage. From this moment forward, Noah believed Ethan deserved complete freedom to decide the future without any expectation, pressure, or sense of responsibility inherited from previous generations. If Ethan wished to end the marriage, Noah promised the process would remain private, respectful, and uncomplicated. There would be no public embarrassment, no financial conditions, and no resentment. Ethan remained silent for several moments, carefully studying the documents before lifting his eyes toward Noah. For the first time since their wedding, he fully understood the generosity behind Noah's decision. Noah was willing to release everything because he cared more about Ethan's happiness than about preserving a title or fulfilling tradition. That realization carried greater emotional weight than any financial revelation or corporate victory they had experienced together. Ethan slowly closed the folder without signing a single page. He stood, walked toward the fireplace where the warm light filled the room, and quietly reflected on everything that had changed since the day they first met. He remembered the wedding filled with whispers, the unexplained respect shown by strangers, the quiet advice that had saved Brooks Capital, the extraordinary truth revealed in New York, and the letters that had rewritten his understanding of both families. None of those moments had been created by obligation alone. They had been built through Noah's patience, integrity, kindness, and unwavering belief that people deserve the opportunity to choose freely. Ethan returned to the table, gently placed one hand over the unopened documents, and smiled with complete certainty. He explained that if he signed those papers, he would be walking away from the most meaningful relationship he had ever known. Their marriage might have begun because of a promise made by two grandfathers, but everything that mattered now belonged entirely to them. Ethan carefully removed the dissolution agreement from the folder and tore it into several pieces before placing them beside the fireplace, where they would later be responsibly discarded. Noah looked at him with quiet surprise, his usually composed expression softening into a genuine smile. There were no dramatic declarations and no need for elaborate promises. The decision itself said everything that words could not. They had finally reached the point where neither family tradition nor legal obligation defined their future. Standing together in the warm light of the library, Ethan and Noah chose one another freely, not because they were expected to remain together, but because they had discovered that trust, respect, and genuine affection had quietly grown into the foundation of a life they both truly wanted to share. 1 year later, the life Ethan Brooks and Noah Bennett had built together reflected none of the uncertainty that had surrounded the beginning of their marriage. The Brooks family estate no longer felt like a place connected to obligation or unanswered questions. It had become a welcoming home filled with laughter from visiting friends, conversations with neighbors, and regular gatherings dedicated to supporting the local community. Brooks Capital had entered its strongest period of sustainable growth in decades, not because it pursued rapid expansion at any cost, but because Ethan had embraced the principles Noah had quietly practiced for years. Long-term responsibility, ethical leadership, and genuine respect for employees became the foundation of every important decision. Across the country, business schools began studying Brooks Capital as an example of modern corporate stewardship rather than simply financial success. At the same time, Noah continued avoiding public attention despite widespread admiration within financial circles. His investment network remained focused on strengthening family-owned businesses, encouraging innovation, and protecting organizations that created lasting opportunities for future generations. Together, Ethan and Noah established the Brooks Bennett Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to educational scholarships, small business development, and community revitalization throughout underserved neighborhoods across the United States. Instead of placing their names at the center of every project, they encouraged local leaders, teachers, and volunteers to shape programs according to the needs of each community. The foundation quickly earned respect because it measured success by lives improved rather than headlines created. On a warm spring afternoon, the foundation hosted its first annual community celebration in the gardens surrounding the restored estate. Students who had received scholarships proudly shared their future plans. Small business owners described how new opportunities had transformed their families, and volunteers celebrated partnerships that had strengthened neighborhoods. Throughout the region, Ethan walked among the guests, greeting every visitor personally and listening carefully to their stories with genuine interest. Watching from nearby, Noah smiled quietly, clearly happier seeing others succeed than receiving recognition himself. As the afternoon slowly turned into evening, the crowds gradually departed until only Ethan and Noah remained walking together along the familiar stone path winding through the blooming gardens. The same estate that had once witnessed an arranged marriage filled with whispered judgment had become a place defined by trust, kindness, and hope. Ethan paused beside the old fountain where fresh flowers surrounded the water and reflected on everything they had experienced together. He admitted that if someone had told him 1 year earlier that the greatest decision of his life would begin with a promise he never wanted to keep, he never would have believed it. Noah smiled gently and replied that life often revealed its greatest blessings only after people stopped judging one another by appearances. Ethan looked toward the peaceful landscape stretching across the property and quietly thanked his grandfather for believing in character before reputation. He then thanked Noah for teaching him that true wealth could never be measured by balance sheets, market valuations, or prestigious titles. It was measured by integrity, compassion, and the willingness to help others without expecting anything in return. As the evening sun settled beyond the trees, casting warm golden light across the gardens, Ethan reached for Noah's hand, and they continued walking side by side toward the future they had freely chosen together. Their story had begun with obligation, misunderstanding, and quiet sacrifice, but it ended with mutual respect, enduring partnership, and a shared purpose that would continue inspiring countless lives for many years to come.